Please let me in. One chilly winter morning, as I opened the front door to fetch the newspaper, I was stunned by what I saw. My 5-year-old grandson, Jake, stood shivering in the yard, his little body trembling uncontrollably from the cold. Shocked, I immediately rushed him inside and wrapped him in a warm blanket. "Where are your parents?" I asked, trying to mask my growing alarm. "They went to Hawaii with my sister," Jake murmured, his voice quivering as much from emotion as from the cold. "They said I would be a bother." His words hit me like a thunderbolt. As soon as he stopped shivering, my anger surged. How could they abandon their own son like this? What on earth were they thinking? I resolved then and there to confront my son and daughter-in-law about this cruelty. My name is Susan, a 58-year-old nurse still working hard after losing my husband to illness years ago. I raised my only son, David, on my own, doing everything I could to provide him with a comfortable life. I worked long hours but ensured he never felt deprived, compensating for my absence by giving him everything he wanted. Perhaps I spoiled him too much, as David grew up self-centered, a trait that worried me. 6 years ago, David married Tracy, a woman with a flashy demeanor but an apparent love for their 2 children, Jake, now 5, and Sophie, 4. Living just 10 minutes away, I supported them without interfering too much. As a grandmother, Jake and Sophie were the light of my life. I cherished them equally, or at least I tried to. But it was impossible to ignore the blatant favoritism Tracy showed Sophie. Tracy, who had always longed for a daughter, seemed to pour all her energy and resources into Sophie's activities: dance, piano, French classes. "Sophie, you're so talented at everything. Mommy's so proud of you," she would gush, completely ignoring Jake. Jake, on the other hand, was rarely given the same opportunities. After the last World Cup, he became passionate about soccer and begged to join a team. "Why not let Jake take a soccer class?" I suggested to Tracy. "Oh no, that's just a waste of time and money," she dismissed. Hoping David might feel differently, I approached him. "Jake's so eager to learn. I can help with the costs if needed." David shrugged. "He's fine. He wouldn't be able to handle it anyway." Their lack of support for Jake broke my heart. He was a bright, artistic child whose early drawings were so good that even my colleagues at work admired them. But at home, his talents were mocked. "Look at Jake's latest drawing," I once said to Tracy and David, showing them his work. "Ha, probably not that great," Tracy scoffed. "Drawing's useless anyway." Jake's accomplishments were barely acknowledged, while Sophie was showered with praise. She wore beautiful, trendy outfits, while Jake was left in worn, ill-fitting clothes. "Why not take Jake shopping for some new clothes?" I asked once. "Boys' clothes are all the same," Tracy replied dismissively. "Girls are just more fun to shop for." Though I often disagreed with their treatment of Jake, I hesitated to push too hard. I had felt similarly about raising David at times and didn't want to overstep. Still, I did everything I could to ensure Jake felt loved. He became deeply attached to me and spent as much time at my house as possible. When I invited Sophie to stay over too, she eagerly said yes. But Tracy immediately vetoed the idea. "Sophie can't stay over," she said firmly. "What if something happened to her?" Despite the unfairness, the siblings got along well. Jake adored his sister, and Sophie admired him. But their parents' favoritism left scars I couldn't ignore, and neither could Jake. And now, seeing him shivering in the cold that winter morning, left behind like an afterthought, I knew it was time to act. This treatment couldn't go on any longer. One day, while I was visiting David's house, he made an offhand comment. "Raising kids really costs a lot, huh?" "Yeah, but you'll manage," I replied lightly. Then, almost without thinking, I added, "Besides, I've been saving some money for Jake and Sophie. I had been quietly saving for my grandchildren since their births, intending to give it to them when they truly needed it. I hadn't planned to tell anyone yet, not wanting David or Tracy to rely on it prematurely. But David's casual remark made me slip. His eyes lit up instantly. "Really? Then just give me Jake's share now, just in case." His response caught me off guard. "But this is for the grandchildren, and I can't give it now." "Come on, we need it now." "Just give it to me," he insisted, his tone growing more demanding. Overwhelmed by his persistence, I reluctantly handed him a debit card linked to the account. It was a limited card, set up to prevent overspending beyond the balance. This card can't exceed the account balance, I explained, trying to reassure myself. Maybe this will help Jake. Hoping for the best, I decided to wait and see. I could never have imagined the heartbreak that awaited me. One early winter morning, I went to fetch the newspaper. To my utter shock, I found Jake huddled in the snow-covered yard, shivering uncontrollably. "Jake, what happened?" I cried, rushing to him. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes vacant, his lips blue. "Please, let me in," he whispered weakly. Without hesitation, I scooped him up and carried him inside. Turning the heater to full blast, I wrapped him in a blanket and handed him a cup of hot chocolate. Gradually, his shivering subsided, and he began to calm down. "Where are your mom and dad?" I asked gently. "They went to Hawaii with my sister," he said softly. I froze. "Hawaii? They didn't take you?" Jake shook his head. "No, they said I'd be a bother." Their cruelty was incomprehensible. "When did they leave?" "About 3 days ago," he replied. "I ate all the bread they left, but it ran out, so I came here." My heart broke as I realized he had been alone in a cold, empty house for days, with barely anything to eat. Fighting back tears, I quickly prepared him breakfast. Jake devoured it hungrily, pausing only to say how delicious it was. "You should have come here right away," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Dad and Mom said I shouldn't go to you," he admitted. "But I couldn't stand it anymore. I'm sorry, Grandma." "Jake, you don't have to apologize," I said firmly. "You can stay here with me. Don't worry anymore." I took him to the hospital to ensure he was okay. Thankfully, while he was weak, he wasn't in serious danger. Relieved but furious, I vowed to protect him from his parents. Still, one question haunted me. How could they afford a trip to Hawaii? A sinking feeling settled in my chest as I checked the balance on the debit card account. My fears were confirmed. It was down by $10,000. I was livid. They had used Jake's savings for their vacation. To prevent them from taking any more, I withdrew the remaining money and closed the account. The account is empty now, I thought grimly. Let's see what they do next. 2 days later, David called me, his voice filled with frustration. "Hey, the card isn't working. I can't withdraw money from the ATM. What's going on?" "I needed the money urgently," I said calmly, "so I withdrew it. Don't worry, there's plenty of time to save up again before Jake goes to college." "Well, okay," he muttered, clearly annoyed. "Just make sure to deposit more soon." That phone call confirmed what I already knew. David and Tracy cared more about themselves than their children. Determined to protect Jake, I began consulting with legal experts about gaining custody. I was nervous about the challenges ahead, but then I received some astonishing news that only strengthened my resolve. I was completely exasperated by David's audacity. Suppressing the urge to yell, I avoided mentioning their Hawaii trip and made an excuse. Left with no further arguments, David hung up in frustration. 3 days later, David and Tracy returned from their trip. Upon noticing Jake's absence, David immediately called me. I briefly explained that Jake was staying with me and arranged a meeting at their house. While Jake and Sophie were at daycare, I arrived at their home with someone accompanying me. In the living room, David and Tracy glared at us, clearly annoyed. "Who is that?" Tracy asked, her tone sharp. "First, I want to know why you went on a trip and left Jake alone," I said, glaring back at them. They exchanged glances and smirked, showing no remorse. "You emptied Jake's account," David said. "It's your fault we couldn't go shopping or eat out on the trip. It was a ruined vacation because of that." I was stunned by their gall. "What are you talking about? That's your fault. Why didn't you use your own money?" "We can't do that," Tracy snapped. "Jake is only 5, and he's a handful anyway. What's his is ours." I was appalled by their selfishness, especially since they didn't even take Jake on the trip. "You know he's only 5, I said, my voice rising. "What you did is terrible. It's unforgivable." "Jake isn't very likable," Tracy said nonchalantly. "Sophie is enough for us." "They're both your children," I said, horrified. "Yeah, but I never wanted Jake. Girls are cuter, and raising boys is pointless," she replied. Their shocking attitude prompted the man with me to speak up. "I'm Michael, a lawyer," he said firmly. "From what I've heard, it's clear you have no affection for Jake. This is a blatant case of neglect." I had consulted Michael beforehand about taking legal custody of Jake, and he had come to witness the meeting. "I can't leave Jake with you anymore," I declared. I'm going to adopt him. My announcement seemed to surprise them, but they didn't appear to care. Fine by me, David said with a shrug. Yeah, do whatever you want, Tracy added indifferently. Okay, Michael interjected. Legally adopting a child under 15 requires parental consent. Will you formally agree to this, with me as a witness? David and Tracy formally consented without hesitation. We're relieved to be rid of him, Tracy said. Now we can focus on making Sophie a star. You treat children like possessions, I snapped. And you're just trying to mold Sophie to your wishes. Shut up, David spat angrily. I held my ground. I've recorded all your statements and will be reporting everything to Child Services. Whatever, go ahead, Tracy said defiantly. So we need to hear Sophie's feelings too, I said. I don't trust you with her either and plan to take her as well. What? Are you out of your mind? Tracy's confidence evaporated, replaced by fury. You can't take her. Sophie loves us and wouldn't want to be separated. Really? I said coolly. Sophie told me she doesn't enjoy her dance or singing lessons. That can't be true, Tracy shouted. Have you been forcing her into things she doesn't like? Do you really think she'll keep going along with your plans? My firm stance hit a nerve and they began to look worried. Finally, I revealed some big news. By the way, Jake's drawing, the one you mocked, won the grand prize in a competition. He even received $3,000 in prize money. Their eyes widened in shock. You're lying. He can't have that kind of talent. David sputtered. Actually, I continued, a young nurse colleague who loved Jake's drawings suggested entering them in an art contest. Not only did he win, but many people now want to buy his work. Their stunned faces brought me some satisfaction, but their audacity wasn't finished. Actually, Jake is still our beloved child, Tracy said suddenly, her tone syrupy. Yeah, David chimed in. Families should stay together. The paperwork is already done, Michael reminded them calmly. Realizing their loss, they began arguing. This is your fault for doting on Sophie. What? You're the one who wanted to leave Jake behind. I had had enough. Jake is a precious child, I said. From now on, I won't support either of you. Don't expect anything from me again. Please, don't say that. We'll change. Please help us. They begged shamelessly, clinging to me. Just then, the doorbell rang. A voice announced, We're the police. I turned to David. It seems your ride is here. What? Why? He stammered. Of course, I said. You left your child alone for 3 days while you enjoyed a trip. David tried to grab my arm. Wait, no. I brushed him off and handed them over to the authorities. After that, I formally adopted Jake. Sophie, when asked, said, I want to be with my brother and grandma. The three of us began a new life together. I demanded $30,000 from David and Tracy for emotional distress and misused funds. Though they were released from custody, the scandal cost them their jobs and they eventually divorced. Jake is now thriving, joyfully drawing, and Sophie is happier and more playful. Watching them grow has become the greatest purpose of my life, and I'm determined to work hard to give them the love and security they deserve.